Welcome to Adhocracy.tv.
Yes.
And we are kicking it into full steam ahead. Our goal is to get to 10 episodes. If you're interested in following this, staying up to date, go ahead and navigate to Adhocracy.tv. We will be putting together a mailing list so that way you can be up to date on that. We'll also be publishing on YouTube and Spotify.
Yeah, and actually through Anchor, so it's going to go to Spotify and a few other platforms as well.
Okay, so we got multiple platforms.
At least iTunes. I know that one for sure, and there's a few others in there as well.
So wherever you find your podcast, you should be able to search for Ad-Hocracy.
It hits the big ones, yeah.
Okay, now I want to recap because Ad-Hocracy is a unique word. What's the definition of Ad-Hocracy?
Ad-Hocracy basically means you're making it up as you go along. I think technically
that sounds very fitting for what we're doing.
Yes. I think technically it's a form of government, the RISI at the AC at the end, AC at the end.
Adhocracy, yeah.
That part of it, I think, describes a form of government technically, but the idea of making it up as you go along, I liked ad hoc, and then I saw it written on a board at work where it said Adhocracy, and it's
It sounds good. It sounds fitting. I think we got, so we got the where people can find us. Do we have any cadence planned out, really? I think we're aiming for weekly recording, but the publication dates may vary a little bit.
Yeah, that's going to be, something that, because when I first started this a while back, that was the big thing I ran into was timing. I was trying to do about once a week, and it was okay for a while until summer hit.
Yeah.
and then we went camping and all of that. So.
Yeah, okay. And then we also are learning the ropes as far as editing goes and keeping things interesting. So hopefully our cuts are interesting and not totally cringeworthy for the internet. So they probably will be.
I hope they
it's
are,
gonna be
cringe.
It's going to be cringe-tastic.
At least a couple moments.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, and today's episode, since it is very pertinent, it is in the news, it is everywhere. You cannot escape it whether you want to or not.
It's coming for you.
No administration can plan for it, supposedly, even though that seemed pretty obvious, and the WHO warned about variants coming left and right. But we are talking about nobody's favorite topic, COVID.
Omicron.
Variant.
Yes.
Okay, what's a variant?
Well, so, yes, a variant is basically when the virus mutates, anytime you have a significant mutation that escapes kind of what they would consider the standard, which in looking into this, I was surprised at how much variation there is even within the variants. Mm-hmm. But basically, when you get a new variant, it's defined by the CDC into one of four buckets. Each of them include more, so basically they build on each other. But basically, you've got
bad, super bad, extra bad.
It actually so variants being monitored. That's like, hey, we're aware of this new variant, and it's doing nothing. Like, it's all that we're noticing is that there's some new genetic patterns there, and that's really about it. It's not causing any kind of concern. Now, a variant of interest is where things start to get more interesting.
Yes,
bad
okay.
joke.
Reframing things, all right.
So basically, that's where you start to get a little bit of an escape from how it's being treated. It's not a significant escape where the vaccines are getting less effective. And actually, well, I'll finish this and then I'll go into which variants there are out there right now. But then there gets to a variant of concern, which is what Omicron is. And that's where you get a fair amount of impact on how it's diagnosed. So you can't diagnose it with the same diagnostics that you were using for the previous variants. It has some vaccine escape. The therapeutics or any of the medical approaches to it.
Now when we're saying vaccine escape, are we saying both natural immunity and vaccine escape? Are they one and the same? Or is there differences?
There's differences, but honestly, they're usually pretty minor. As far as the CDC defines it, it's pretty specific towards the vaccine. A lot of what they had on when they categorized these doesn't actually have to do with any of the natural immunity. This is all based on what the medical community is able to prevent and treat once the variant, or once once a new variant comes out. So
got it. Okay.
The natural immunity part of it is not really within the CDC. How they classify variants. I should say.
Okay.
It's not how they classify it. And then there's variants of high concern, and that's the ones where
It's like the smallpox equivalent. Is that kind of the idea? Like it's.
I'm not sure on that, but basically you can't test for it. The vaccine's not working. The standard treatments
So we're back at square one, but with more anxiety and all that kind of stuff all over again.
Yes, and another big piece of this too is transmissibility. So like variant of concern, that's where it starts to really ramp up on the transmission, and the variant of high concern, that's where the transmission is going nuts. So
that's where we're talking contagion movie scariness, but potentially worse or better. We don't know. It's just the unknown side of things.
And I'm not sure how they balance between like, hey, this one's escaping the diagnostics, but it's not that transmittable. From what I've seen, it seems to favor transmissibility, and I'm sure that's part of the fact that when these come out, you don't know exactly what the repercussions are going to be, but you just see it spreading really quickly.
Right, because it's kind of like we're doing analysis at a high level after the fact, once you have enough data, but you basically don't want to be patient zero in any one of these situations.
Yes.
Especially once you're talking about variants of concern or significant concern.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, too, is you can move between them. So typically, I'm assuming you would start at a higher concern and then ramp it down as you learn more about it, just to make sure that you're taking the safer approach because you'd rather overcorrect that direction than the other, I'm assuming.
Maybe within the medical ecosystem, they may be doing that internally, but probably not on the what's publicly described to reduce risk of panic too. So there's a little bit of both, I'm sure.
It's a balance. So out of the variants that have come out of COVID, there's actually been 10 variants being monitored. And this was one of the pieces that I found interesting because we've heard a lot about the OG COVID. Then there was a little bit about Alpha. And then Delta went nuts.
That one spread pretty quick,
Yeah. And
then we skipped a bunch of letters, though.
Skipped a bunch of letters. And some of them were skipped like the what was it? The one that shared the president's name.
Yeah, the
Chinese. Yeah, they skipped that one just to
for political reasons. Yeah, I mean, it made sense. Like,
I mean, if they'd had a Donald variant,
that would have probably been
Joe,
like, it would have gone through. That would have stuck.
So that one made sense, despite concerns with China. Anyways, there are 10 of these variants being monitored.
Okay.
All the way out to Zeta. There are there's no variants of interest, and there's 2 variants of concern, and that has been Delta and Omicron.
Okay, yeah.
And there's no variants of high concern at this
point.
And
Delta, as from what I read, was that Delta seemed to be well covered by vaccination.
Yes.
And Omicron, it still seems like it's a little bit up in the air. However, the indications... Now, what's interesting to me about this is you have CDC guidance saying, get boosted if you've already gotten your 2 doses. And then you have the WHO saying, please, rich countries, don't boost because we need vaccine supplies globally, and we don't need that resource constrained because we at least need to get initial doses into arms.
Yeah, and some of this... And one piece on Omicron, too, is that it came from Africa. So there were African countries who were having that exact concern.
Right, and that makes sense from both on-the-ground friends we have that are in Africa, describing, there's like basically no vaccination. Honestly, for a lot of folks out there, COVID isn't really the main concern. Like, there are some serious infrastructure problems, health and safety, like just individual safety problems of, you still have local warlords, you still have other problems, and COVID is really not the main living concern for a lot of these people.
Agreed, but I mean, anytime you throw another log on the fire, even if it's a smaller log, it's still rough.
Yeah, so. No, for sure.
So this came out of Africa, but the reason that it got upped to a variant of concern was mostly because of its transmissibility.
Yep.
And as far as the vaccine effectiveness, that's one where... That's kind of an interesting question because if you get boosted, then the vaccine seems to work. But it's the same vaccine.
It's still alpha, basically, right?
It's still the
alpha.
original.
Is alpha a variant or was
alpha is a variant?
Alpha's a variant. Okay, so this is original.
There's OG COVID, original gangsta COVID. Yeah. And then there's Alpha, and then the big ones are Delta and Omicron.
All right, I just want to make sure I get my terms correct here. So when you're getting your 3rd shot, you're getting boosted with the exact same recipe to create the molecule plus whatever our body needs to make it antibodyified.
Yeah.
That's a technical, non-medical term.
Yes, very technical. So the interesting piece with that is that means that the original vaccine is actually effective
Just maybe less
against
so.
Omicron. But one of the studies that came out of Israel was pointing to the fact that you have a lot of vaccine effectiveness fall off at about 6 months.
Right. We're talking half-life. These antibodies reduce maybe by half after, I think I read 60 to 120-ish days. The exact numbers are highly variable in there because I don't remember it correctly.
Yeah.
But basically, the amount of antibody floating around in your bloodstream presumably decays over time, and that kind of makes sense. It's like so much of our body. It's a use or lose it. Don't work your muscle, you atrophy. And in the same way, that seems to be the case, right?
And it's the same way for natural, like if you've had COVID, if you had the vaccine, both of them taper off. The vaccine seems, from what I've seen, and I know that there's plenty of debate about this, the studies I've seen have shown that the vaccine tends to give you a higher resistance initially, but it also drops off quicker.
Okay.
But that's not, none of those were looking at I believe it's the T cell.
Okay.
Is it the T cell? Basically, it's like the difference between RAM and hard drive on
right,
your computer.
the long-term and short-term memory of
and basically, all of the antibody tests are just measuring your RAM.
Yeah,
they can't
correct.
really measure the hard drive.
Well,
So-
no one really wants to have their bone marrow drilled into bones drilled into to extract bone marrow to get those counts. This is not a comfortable procedure for most folks.
This is very true.
Although if you're willing to do that, perhaps consider donating bone marrow. There is a great need for that in our nation. So,
yeah. So I'm not sure about saying that this is actually escaping the vaccine. I think that this was ramped up to variant of concern mostly on transmissibility.
Yep.
Given the fact that the vaccine does help against it, like what was the difference here between severe disease? With the booster, you go from 40 to 86% of symptomatic. So that's a good almost 50% chance that if you have the booster, you're less likely to get symptomatic.
Okay.
Which symptomatic, I mean, you don't want to be symptomatic.
I hate being sick, honestly.
Severe disease. And
Right,
the severe disease, that bump was actually less. It went from 80 to 98.
Okay.
And that 98, that's a great number.
It really is.
That's a really good number. But also that 80% is still a really good number too.
Oh, yeah. It's infinitely better than 0. So I think we can run away with that information saying, okay, there's practical benefit to this thing. Now, there's a lot of people that are still concerned about the vaccine's still new. It's untested technology, blah, blah, blah. I think there's a lot of questions in that department. And I guess I'm not sure how far we want to go down that rabbit hole of addressing mRNA technology being around for quite a while, or perhaps mRNA actually being a more reliable factory mechanism within our bodies because you're giving the exact recipe for the protein rather than having to do the manufacturing outside of your body, having a little bit of variation, and then re-injecting the built protein.
Yeah, I mean, the mRNA, and I mean, the big thing that I've seen is not really how the vaccine was developed. It's what the vaccine does. It's that spike protein. And that spike protein seems to be messing with people regardless of getting it from COVID or the vaccine. It lingers in the body.
Right.
They're not exactly sure how long. Now
that being said, though, there's
the
I was going to say there's a certain confirmation. They made a specific change when the designers of the vaccine were doing that made it not conform into a certain shape that binds into the cells. So it starts out in its initial state, and that's what the body's being trained for. The confirmation is when you have specific problems, and I wonder what's happening there. And that was one of the big safety things. That was I'll have to look up the source where I got that from. There's an interesting one on medRxiv University. That was the guy. He was talking about that, and he interviewed an individual on there who's describing all the mechanisms of that and kind of the genius behind that one particular modification that they made to make it safer. But yet, we still have concerns of myocarditis and pericarditis in young adults.
Yes.
And I think that concern, based on, I was just talking to our physician yesterday, and he said that concern has panned out to not be nearly as big of a risk in the pediatric realm as they were expecting. So the safety profile is much better than people were expecting, honestly.
Yeah, and there was concern that came up with that because when they opened the age groups for the vaccines to the 12 to 17,
12 to 15, 12 to 17.
The teenager group. We'll just call it the teenagers.
Yeah, male teenagers, right?
There was a significant uptick in that exact category, but then what I've been seeing is that on the younger, below that, it didn't continue the trend upward. It actually fell off. So the highest area where you're seeing those incidents of that is in that teenage group for boys.
Yeah, and then the other news, though, also recently is that the vaccine was not producing the benefits in the 6 months to 2-year-old category. So I think they're having to rejigger the doses on there and
I haven't looked at any of
again.
that.
So yeah, I think Pfizer BioNTech, in their study, they said they kind of hit the brakes on this, saying it's actually not producing enough at a tenth of the dose of the kid's dose or something like that. Is a much lower dose from the already lower dose in the pediatric level. So
interesting.
So I think that study is going to continue, and they will be readjusting dosages and hopefully getting to an effectiveness level.
Yeah, but I mean, like, as far as the mRNA vaccines, though, one of the huge wins out of that was the fact that you're able to produce it quickly and at large scale, as opposed to the more traditional vaccines.
Yeah, because it takes a long time to grow things in eggs.
So when you're looking at a global pandemic that you're not, well, I guess global is wrapped into the word pandemic, isn't it? Anyways, when you're looking at that kind of a situation we had, these vaccines truly did save millions of lives when we were figuring out how to treat this disease. So overall, they've been a massive, massive win. Now, there's definitely going to be, I mean, when you're looking at a global pandemic, there's risks no matter which path you take. And I think that the mRNA vaccine was a good path to take. What do we do with it now that we know how to treat?
Yeah, because it doesn't treat everything.
Exactly.
Like, it's an amazing technology, but mRNA doesn't solve every medical problem known to man by a long shot.
And I don't think that the fall off of efficacy is something that was expected. Like, the boosters weren't necessarily expected that I'm aware of. I didn't hear anything about that.
I think initially. Israel was actually expecting that a little bit, which is kind of ironic because I feel like they were saying like, oh yeah, of course you need to spread things out a little bit more, and then that gets things into the long-term memory. And yet here they are doing, massive boosts again. Yes. I think they're basically just saying just keep boosting like crazy because for whatever reason the benefits outweigh the risks. Now, I've talked to a couple people. They've gotten their booster shot. My neighbors, they felt like garbage for about a day and a half afterwards. I got boosted. I felt like garbage.
I've heard that from a couple people, but I've also heard from a couple people that they didn't. So I'm not exactly sure what's going on there.
Yep. Yeah. And my sample size is just of the folks I've been talking to. So that's
exactly.
Take that with a grain of salt.
So something that happened to me. What? So I realized I felt like garbage after my second shot of the first vaccine. And I think that that's mostly my fault because I got it too soon after having COVID.
Right. Yeah. Because you got COVID. Yeah. And your timing and my timing was a little bit ironic. So I'm going to just maybe throw a little bit of shade to the VA, but I was able to, as a regular citizen, get my shot really quickly.
You got it through the VA?
No. And you, on the other hand, through the VA,
that was it. Yeah,
were substantially delayed in getting your shot, which was really shocking to me because I'm like, okay, this whole thing is being like Defense Production Act. Like, you'd be figuring like VA has a large percentage of the population that is classified as vulnerable, and yet they were unable to deliver that efficiently.
I don't know if they would classify the VA as vulnerable. I mean, I realize there's a lot of conditions that people come out of the military with, but I don't know if all of those would be considered immune compromised.
Correct. I'm just saying, like, in general, in an aging population, like, they're a group that is responsible for managing a wide age range of folks.
Because age relation to COVID severity was definitely
correct.
Thing.
Yeah,
definitely
exactly. And that was something that surprised me.
So my experience with the VA situation is right before they opened the vaccine to everybody.
Yep.
They opened it to the VA like a week before.
Okay.
Now, in my opinion, the VA was not set up for success on this. I mean, I haven't had. I'm not going to give the VA a 5-star review.
Okay.
It's an old system that needs a lot of help. But as far as getting the vaccines out to veterans, the VA was not set up for success because you were about to roll it out to every American. And
right.
It's like we tip our hat to the veterans of, hey, you guys can get it first. I put in a note like, yes, I'd like to get the vaccine.
Yeah.
And I still haven't heard back. So
okay, yeah, right. And then you're able to do this through that corporate space or regular mail?
Yeah, through my work. My work had an on-site.
But to be honest though, like even on the civilian side of things, like scheduling at a local pharmacy right now is nearly impossible. I think we're right back.
I haven't even tried.
So when I went to go schedule mine at the local clinic, it was like, okay, you can either get it December 12th, December 16th, or January 28th.
Oh my gosh!
And it was like. It was insane, like the amount of lag time in that. And then the same deal. So I did the same online search that a bunch of other people did, which is like, okay, start spamming the Fred Meyers, the Kroger's, whichever your like favorite grocery store, pharmacy, local clinic is, but that has online scheduling. And that's been a challenge. My neighbors, on the other hand, said, oh yeah, we went to the local place down by the airport, and that's been super quick every time. So it seems like it's one of those things, if you know how or who, then you can get in, and it's just kind of like a matter of technical prowess.
I feel like it might, taking it back to early COVID, it might be similar to like the toilet paper.
Yeah, the toilet paper crisis of 2019.
If you went to like Costco would never have toilet paper.
Yeah.
But if you went to your mom and pop store, like
They
down
totally
the
have
road,
yeah.
there would usually be a whole shelf full.
Yeah.
And it's just like, everyone's like, oh, there's no TP. It's like, did you try your mom and pop store? Because everybody doesn't even think about them during the pandemic. It's like, so I went and bought toilet paper at, well, it's not even a mom and pop store, but just at Bartell's here.
Yeah, but
and
totally. McDaniel's totally stocked up tons of material, which was fantastic. They had everything. Things that Home Depot was sold out of, they had like hand sanitizer. Remember when that was a scarce resource and people were selling that for like $400 a bottle? Yes. Like they had gallon jugs at McDaniel's. Like,
oh my gosh. So
okay, so are we at panic in the streets yet with Omicron?
No, and honestly, the more interesting information has come since I've actually I like looking into stuff. I looked into the Omicron pretty early before there was a lot of data on it.
Okay.
I looked into it a second time. There was a lot more data, and I was pretty confident with what I'd found there. The new big piece of information that's come out that I haven't looked into a lot, but I've seen plenty of news reports on it. I haven't looked at actual numbers. Is basically Omicron is far less severe.
Okay.
Which is, I mean, you never want to hear about a new flavor to the pandemic, but if it's going to take a different flavor, this is the direction we want it to go. You want it to be less severe. Now, the transmission...
Are we at the point where we can just declare this thing endemic and move on with life? Because
we're close.
We're heading down the path.
We're close.
Right, and that's the thing is like these viruses, they start out super big bad, and oftentimes they evolve to become more adapted to the host that they're trying to infect to
the
spread
virus
the
doesn't
virus.
want to die.
Right. So it needs to spread, and it needs to spread so efficiently and as maximally as possible. And in order to do so, we're talking about less severity. Now, this still is a really bad situation for hospitals because even though it's less severe, the increased transmissibility is the big concern from a hospitalization metric. Right.
But especially because
we're talking total counts here. That's just like, in which I feel like is the only thing we should really be reporting on in the news today, which is like total number of hospital beds that are consumed relative to capacity. And that's like what we care about. We don't care about number of infections. It's not really an interesting metric now. We care about capacity. I mean, that's why Hawaii locked down so hard in the summer. That's why, like you look at these smaller states in like Alaska with like not that many beds to work with.
So something that I found to help, because I totally agree. If the hospital system is still going to get inundated, even with a less severe, then those people are going to get burned out, and you're still going to see a lot of fatalities because you're not going to have the capacity to be able to treat who you need. So,
right. And what overcapacity means for anyone who's curious is it basically means that there is going to be more patients per nurse, basically. So unfortunately, like when you're talking about like in normal capacity, you might have like one nurse for 2 patients in like a critical care type of situation. Now we're talking about one nurse for 5 patients. And if that same nurse has to manage oxygen flows and make sure, checking pulses, doing all their regular charting and stuff, the quality of care will drop. Yes. And at a certain point in time, that's really bad. I mean, that's like that's what's going to increase fatalities, in my opinion, probably more than anything, is just people being burned out, not being able to think clearly and effectively.
And I think that, the approach of having the National Guard help with that, that's good. I see 1,000 troops for the nation, and it's like, well, that's like what, one soldier per.
it's a very small percentage, but if they are able to,
the national.
Yeah.
And so if the state's activated as well, that can be a huge help.
Yes.
And that's something that I've got relatives in Montana, and they, certain places in Montana, we're doing okay, but there's other places where the capacity on the hospital was, they were triaging people.
Yeah.
So it's a very real concern. So it's, and basically at the end of all of this, my thought on this is before the data on Omicron not being as severe came out, I was actually leaning towards getting boosted. And,
really?
I've had COVID.
Yep.
I've been vaccinated.
Yep.
You're
superhuman now.
I'm pretty sure I got some fat antibodies. We're just walking around in my body waiting to beat up COVID.
No, definitely.
But there was a big piece of me that was still even considering getting boosted. Now, with this new information, I mean, I don't think I got COVID that bad. I mean, I had it for a while, had it for about 10 days, and it was getting more annoying than anything.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think I might stay away from the booster for now. But
it almost to me, like in your situation, like me being like playing your role, I would like knowing you already had COVID, you already have that level of antibodies and protection. Then you already got the double whammy of vaccination after that. Like there's no way you don't have a large percentage of antibodies in your body. Like I think that meets all the criteria of being super vaccinated or super immune or whatever they're calling that. I would be waiting for the next variant of concern or the Omicron vaccine to roll out maybe then after antibodies taper off, based on kind of what we've already talked about. Like I wouldn't be rushing to get a booster right now personally in your category.
If I was going to get a new vaccine against it, I would want to get a non-mRNA vaccine.
Really?
Actually.
Now, why is that?
Just because of the fallout. I mean, and I don't know. I don't have any real strong data to back this, but the mRNA
gut feel decision kind of thing.
Well, because the mRNA vaccines seem to have a bit of a fallout. We're not sure what kind of the long term. If somebody because we just don't have the data yet. We have if somebody got COVID or if somebody got vaccinated and then got COVID 2 years later. We don't have that data. COVID hasn't been around that long.
Right.
So if I was going to get another boost or a vaccine on this, I would want it to be more of the traditional style, which actually there is a new vaccine out. Novavax.
Novavax, okay.
I forget what company makes it, but it's
Nova being new and Vax being vaccine.
Yeah,
so they were really creative on this one.
But yeah, if depending on the type of mandates that come down from the state and local and federal, well, I guess it'd be state and federal governments, or employers. That's actually the direction that I would lean. Would probably be to get more of a traditional vaccine, because then you've got the mRNA. I've got to have the antibodies from the natural fun that I went through of having COVID, and then also getting the more traditional. I mean, that'd be like a 3 legs on a stool as far as I'm concerned.
Have you done any recent reading on the treatments? So we have some new treatments rolling out.
That also is good. There's 2 of them.
There's 2, yeah. Pfizer has one and Merck has one.
On top of the monoclonal antibodies that seem to be doing well as well. Now, I think those aren't doing as well against Omicron.
Only 2 monoclonal antibodies, I believe, are effective against Omicron.
Okay.
So there's...
It's good there's still 2.
There's 2 that are good, and then there are the new pills that are coming out by Merck and Pfizer. Now, I didn't read up on Pfizer's technology. However, I did read up on Merck's, and that one's interesting. You're going to have to clamp that thing down.
I did clamp it.
You're going to have to really crank it down.
Oh, no. I'm good enough. I'll just roll with it.
All right, sounds good. So the Merck one was interesting to me, and it relies on mutation. And that scares me because what it basically does is it is swapping out the emitted RNA, I believe, from the virus saying like produce more virus, and it swaps out like the A's with the T's and it mutates it to a point that it's no longer effective. Now, the downside of that is that also seems to me like it could potentially lead us down a path of creating new variants.
So it like tells your car to replicate itself, but with square tires?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's like it's a fair metaphor. And like the idea is that those square tires are so deformed that they are now ineffective. Yeah. So it's an incredible, like, it really is an incredible advancement. But if you're talking about like, if I were to like weigh the decision of, do I want to get COVID and then need this treatment maybe if I get super sick, or do I want to get vaccinated and reduce my risk of being sick to begin with, I would certainly pick vaccinate first. And because that treatment, there's a reason why the FDA only authorized that for the at-risk individuals. And that's because I think there's a lot more unknown with that technology of relying on mutation to create, safety basically, and allow someone's body to then do its thing afterwards.
Well, something that I've seen too is that when you start treating COVID has a real difference on which therapeutics are effective and which aren't. So if you get it early, then certain ones are much better and then like
the Tamiflu, for example, like after you've already had the flu for a while, probably not going to like slowing down the virus is really not going to like help you once you're now dealing with like damage control at that point in the body. So
I mean, and that's where I think a lot of the that's a nuance right there of when you use a certain drug about how effective it is. I mean, you could make that case for any of the drugs. You could make it for the vaccine. You could make it for vitamin C. I mean, you could make it on
we should probably also prefix this whole podcast by the statement that neither you nor I are medical professionals, and you should honestly talk to your physician who actually is board certified and not just reading preprint articles or otherwise, because like
that's what we've
if we say anything and you want to like take that to the bank or something, like, honestly, don't, and talk to your physician, because they're the ones who are actually in the trenches. They're dealing with things. They're seeing the edge cases. There's so much more to this body of knowledge. Like we're just like scratching the surface and really going off of what we feel like we can speak to. And even that, if we make any errors in here, please comment in here. Let us know how we're wrong, and we can do better next time.
Yeah, honestly, I'm very middle of the road on all of this. I love looking at data.
Yeah.
There was one study that got highly touted for a while amongst the kind of the anti-vaccine community of, in England at a certain point there was like 75% of all hospitalizations were in vaccinated individuals, and it was being pointed out like, look at this, the vaccine's failing, everyone's going to the hospital, but the piece that was missed on all of that, when I looked at the data, was the population size that was coming from. Basically, if you vaccinate enough people and that unvaccinated amount of people is small enough, just based on sheer statistics, yes, you're going to have more
vaccinated than unvaccinated that are in the hospital. Because it's just a functional population. Because again, 95%, 88% effectiveness, well, you're still talking somewhere in between like 12 and 2% of the population that's now still at risk anyways of catching severe disease. You've just reduced the sample size of who's going to the hospital to begin with.
Yes.
So
there's nuance that can be very easily left out and shouted from rooftops pretty easily.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
It's always good to look at, if you have an eye for numbers, go look at this stuff. The site that I've been pulling a lot from is the medRxiv.
Oh, medRxiv, yeah.
Yeah, medRxiv is how they want it pronounced, I believe.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a fantastic site. A lot of preprints, which admittedly with COVID right now, there's going to be a lot of preprints because there's a lot of information coming out and a lot of
and we should probably explode the definition too of what a preprint is versus what a peer-reviewed article is. So preprint, I'll do my best explanation. It is basically like you have gone through the effort of, you've done your study, you've assembled the data, you're now publishing it for the broader scientific community to review, but and basically it is being prioritized for fast dissemination of information. However, it may not fully be reviewed by your peers, people that are in your same industry that can say, hey, this is correct or that's incorrect, or this, the way you sampled this, who are, in the same level of expertise as the person publishing it, can really provide that level of error correction and all that. And the reason is that we're in we have to move fast mode.
Yes. Do you know exactly how many check marks that a preprint has to get before it's considered peer reviewed?
No.
That would be interesting.
So with regards to how many checks a piece of like an article has to get, I don't know the information to that.
Okay.
But I do know that if someone is putting their name, kind of rubber stamping their name on a piece of paper within the scientific community, your reputation is at stake if you put out the wrong information, if you screw it up.
Oh, totally.
Like you're talking about loss of grants, you're talking about loss of future job prospects. So screwing it up, even though it's on a preprint, is not good press for you or your team.
Agreed.
So I think it's one of those things that, yes, while it's preprint and while they specifically say don't take this as medical advice, I think it is reasonable to say this information is at least good enough that maybe you can make an informed decision on maybe whether or not you should mask up or whether or not you should get vaccinated or things like that, because it's operating at sample sizes. And a lot of these are kind of like meta studies of here's all these populations, we've assembled the data.
Well, there's both in there, yeah.
There's totally the very
honestly,
precise stuff too.
When something that I really don't like is when you see those articles of 1,000 people, this thing, and it's okay, but 1,000 out of how many,
Right, yeah. You just have to ask the follow-on questions that.
Well, and but what I don't like is they'll always be at the top, the first line, according to a new study. Mm-hmm. But then that study is never hyperlinked.
Yeah.
When the study is actually hyperlinked, I love it because I can click on that. I don't have to read the rest of the article.
Right.
I can look at because if it's a well put together study,
then you don't click on the ads.
Exactly.
You don't have the 20 slideshow thing that
I never. And anytime a site is click here for the next slide, I'm I'm done. I don't even care about this. I'm done.
I've done it a few times. Some of the stories were good.
Yeah. But basically, this medRxiv site or medRxiv is really great, and I love the few news articles that you do see that do trace back to that, and you can click on it, you can look at it, and then you can see what they found from the article and be okay, this actually makes sense. Maybe I'll trust this news source more. Or
right, exactly. Yeah,
not.
Definitely, and there has been a lot on the not side. So at least for me, I remember during the Trump administration, even I couldn't watch a lot of the regular news sites on either side of the political fence, and that's because they would give me those short synopses or they'd pick the most shocking statement in there. And I'm I'm just going to end up watching the straight White House press briefing, even though it's boring as all get at,
but even
to get the straight information. And even that was not that great. It was
you've got the highly politicized, what are they?
We'll just call them the spin doctors. Yeah, the spin doctors on either side presenting information, but I at least wanted to get my spin straight from the spinning source. So
that's true. Yeah. Because it's very easy to, there were a couple times. Trump, I think, was a knucklehead and did a lot of bad things. But there were plenty of times when he would say something, and he honestly seemed to mean it pretty innocently.
Right.
When I would actually
and then it get
watch
blown out of proportion. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Blown out.
Totally. And I think that's also equally happening now. For the Biden administration right now. It's man, he's getting roughly the same amount of shade thrown at him for not planning the Omicron variant as Trump was for closing down the borders for the travel side of things. And, it's he couldn't move fast enough, but he couldn't move, there's he is moving too fast to close things down. That was xenophobic, but yet he couldn't move, there's
I think
total
what's
trade-offs.
going on is that just everybody assumes that your 2020 hindsight should be just as good as the foresight, and that's not at all the case.
It's not at all. You're working off of limited
completely
information.
Unfair for both of those administrations and politics. And politicians, I do think you got to watch them because they're obviously out for re-election and votes and all of that. But a lot of times, when it comes to this kind of political information, it's
I felt like Germany was really fortunate to have Angela Merkel. They're a scientist and a politician altogether, I believe, is what her credentials were. So she was able to navigate that with more ease and technical knowledge and ability to communicate to the public in a way that was more trusted. So I think for at least for a good period of time, the German population was very appreciative of their prime minister. So
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And
it's good when you have world leaders who are more complicated or more educated than just popular.
Correct. Yeah, I would love to see in our next. I'm not sure if we'll get there, but I would love to see some
Think the world's
technicians.
going to end, Jack?
No, I'm not sure we'll get to the having a technical leader with great experience, whether whether they're a medical person to help reform the medical system, which I think we've seen is at its breaking point in a variety of different ways.
Oh yeah.
And so I think that's what our nation needs is we're going to need someone with great economic savvy, someone with political savvy, medical knowledge. It's I'm not sure.
Medical. I was about to say, you talking about Elon here?
I'm not sure the car part ventilator thing, how far that ended up going. It seemed to be I think it was a nice gesture that he was doing, and honestly, is a really needed thing at the time when you're like, we only have a few manufacturers that can produce these things. Let's try to do it. And I think it was a really good idea for like basic level of ventilator type care, but getting to all the advanced details of that, like I think you want some more sophisticated machinery in there too. All right. With that, go ahead and check out Adhocracy.tv.
Spotify is a great place to find us. A few other places like iTunes. We'll be putting this up on YouTube as well.